Okay, so thank you, Ralph, for joining.
Happy to be here.
So
I might put these, I look like crap anyway on this. I'll probably put these glasses on just because it's bright, but I'll be fully here, I promise. Maybe I can leave them off for a little bit.
Okay. Yeah, nobody doubts that you are looking away during the conversation, so it should be fine.
I got to put it on, it's just too bright.
Yeah.
Sorry.
All right, so thank you for coming, and Professor Ralph Adolphs at Caltech. And Ralph was my postdoc supervisor. After I finished PhD in Christoph's lab,
Now was one of my best postdocs.
Thank you very much. That already served 50% of today's purpose. Yeah, and then after that, I wanted to do some intracranial recording study, and at that time there were two most prominent kind of research institute in the world who were doing the intracranial recording in my mind, and one was UCLA, it's a free, and also another group was in University of Iowa, you and also Matt Howard, and
I still collaborate with those guys quite extensively, actually.
Yeah, and so I approached you, and also part of the reason why I was interested in working with you as a postdoc was that you gave a very interesting talk at Caltech. At the time, I didn't know that was probably a part of the job talk, right?
When was it?
Around 2004 or 5?
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
Remember, you asked me, I think, initially, you and I were auditing this class that John O'Doherty was giving on like reinforcement learning type things. And then I think in there you asked me, can we chat or something? And then we connected.
Maybe. Yeah. So then,
long time ago.
Yeah, I was ready to move to Iowa, but you said that don't come to Iowa. Stay
Did
there.
I?
Yeah, you said that without telling me the reason. And then I was like, oh, okay. And then eventually I heard that you are moving to Caltech.
Okay, that's probably why then.
Yeah. So then,
because otherwise I would recommend Iowa. Iowa is a great place. I mean, I was there for 11 years and got a lot of work done.
Right.
It's the University of Iowa is a fantastic research environment.
Right.
So I would
Right. I actually
to say.
Thanks to this kind of initial collaboration link, I got to visit Iowa. Chris Kovac was main person I interacted with, but every time I went there, food was pretty good, first of all, and also weather was maybe I chose the good weather
Probably.
time.
it can be pretty bad.
Yeah, well, it was quite a good place.
Yeah.
And then after I did a postdoc with you for 5 years, and then went back to Japan. So I know most of the stuff that you have been doing until like 2010 or so, and since then, maybe by your career was initially started with Mark Konishi's lab as a PhD student working on animal.
Right, owls, spatial audition in owls. Yeah, Mark passed away.
Yes.
Recently, unfortunately, Alzheimer's disease.
Right.
But it was great. It was a great time. And when I was a graduate student, so I started '88 at Caltech, and Carver Mead, John Hopfield were there, and the computational neural systems graduate program was like really starting. And then actually Christoph Koch came a few years later, and then took over. But it was really at the kind of the start and the one of the early peaks where CNS at Caltech really took off with these folks there.
At that time, it was probably one of the first interdisciplinary kind of program.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Computation neural systems.
Yeah.
And Gabriel, actually, I interviewed with Gabriel yesterday.
Yeah.
And he said that the first rotation was Mark Konishi. And then at the time he joined, you already finished.
Yeah.
Right. I think he said 96 or something like that.
Yeah. No, I finished 92. So yeah.
Then, but he said that at the introduction to the lab member, Mark was saying that there was actually recent graduate PhD student who changed the entire laboratory culture, like doing ultra marathon, and then did the experiment right after or something like that. And that's probably you, right?
Probably, I guess. Yeah, I don't. Maybe. Yeah.
Yeah, and yeah, Gabriel was quite impressed by the lesion that you left in Mark Konishi's lab. And then you really suddenly switched the field from animal recording into patient study, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah. So, I did basic electrophysiology, single cell recordings in owls for my PhD. And then towards the sort of like, I guess 91 or so, I heard a talk at Caltech by Antonio Damasio.
Okay.
So they invited him over, and he at the time. So this is 1991. There's no fMRI yet, right? It's not really going on. There's some PET, okay, but Demacio was doing all these really interesting lesion studies, and not just lesions, of sensory motor problems or of language, which have been sort of well studied, but these frontal lobe patients are like really high level, focal lesion. And you get these very high level deficits that were really sort of consistent with, a massive modularity view of the mind. And it just seems fascinating. And, Demacio obviously gave a great talk and had like all these beautiful slides and stories. So, here I was, poking away at the owl auditory system, which is, it was subcortical, you can argue to what extent it's cognitive. And it seemed like, wow, the one reason I got into neuroscience in the first place were the big questions, like how does the brain, what's the relation between brain and consciousness, right? But there wasn't any obvious scientific good way to address it at that point. It just seemed like, too big, too hard. And ditto for a lot of human cognitive neuroscience. It just seemed, like we didn't have the tools. But here Demacio was showing all these great, at least, correlations between focal damage to specific structures and remarkably specific and often counterintuitive dissociations. Anyway, so I heard his talk. I thought it was really great and interesting. And I guess email didn't exist yet back then. So, 91, no email. So I wrote him a letter, right? I typed a letter, sent him a letter in the mail and said, I found this really interesting, can I do a postdoc? And he wrote a letter back, right? And said, well, why don't you come and visit? Let's talk and see. So I flew out to Iowa, about a month or so before I was going to defend my thesis, my PhD thesis at Caltech. So I flew out to Iowa, and Demasio's really busy, and he's in a hospital. There's all these doctors walking around. I was completely intimidated because I wasn't used to this environment at all. So I'm sitting in my little office waiting for Demacio. Noontime approaches, and he comes in and says, "Okay, you're ready for your talk." And I had no idea I was going to give a talk. I had nothing, with me, right? And so I walk into this room, and there's all these doctors sitting there with white coats, and it's for grand rounds. And Demacio says, "Okay, start talking." Luckily, I had, being my diligent, typical German self, since I was a month away from my PhD defense, I had practiced my defense talk.
I see.
So I gave it out with chalk on a board. I told them about the auditory brainstem of owls, and I gave a practice talk basically for my defense. I guess they liked it because he offered me a postdoc, but it was not cognitive, not human, but I tried to make an accessible, off-the-cuff talk about my thesis work.
Wow,
it's good. Every graduate student should have this experience. It's a good training exercise. And then then I applied for a fellowship from the Life Science Research Foundation, and I was fortunate to get that. So I funded my way, into the postdoc.
I see. So you became more self-dependent. I see. So you mentioned briefly, but the original interest to come to the neuroscience or biology program in Caltech was the bigger interest or a question of brain and consciousness.
Yeah, and, I'm going to maybe see if I can take these off and look like Terminator or something. Yes, I mean, I remember, I think many of us have had this experience, right? When you're, as you mature, at variable ages, 9, 10, teenager, you start wondering about the world, and of course you learn a lot in school about physics and biology. And, I think for many of us, at some point you really start wondering about consciousness, right? And of course, if you read some philosophy, you learn that, yes, people have really wondered about this, and there's a lot of intelligent stuff that's been written. So I remember as a teenager. Yeah.
Which book influenced you? Or which kind of thoughts influenced you? Do you remember?
I mean, later, I read all of these. And I guess Chalmers and Nagel and all the usual characters. But that, as a teenager, I don't know. Maybe Konrad Lorenz. I do remember in German reading his book, Die Rückseite des Spiegels, Behind the Mirror, which is, sort of how trying to come up with a biological explanation for how our minds, work the way that they work.
Related to self-recognition kind of stuff? No,
just related to cognition and how the mind works in general. But to be honest, I think it was just sort of just on my own. It was just the personal experience of wondering, how it is that I can perceive objects in the world and have conscious experiences. So I had that. I remember distinctively, having that and lying in bed at night as a teenager, just trying to, puzzling about that, right? And always thinking. Always getting to the point where, well, this seems like there's a problem here. Like, how do I understand my existence, conscious experience, given all this stuff that I'm learning in school about physics and so on? There must be some relation there. And then, of course, if you do that, right, and you really focus on it, it gets really hard, right? So it gets really hard. And so I remember lying in bed, at night, just thinking about this, and then getting sleepy and stuff, and always thinking, well, there must be a solution. I'm going to work on it tomorrow. And then tomorrow, same thing. I would lie in bed and say, well, have I gotten any further? And, I just stayed like that, right? So I had that interest, and certainly as like an undergraduate, as an undergrad at Stanford, I took a fair amount of philosophy classes, and there I really started learning about philosophy of mind, in a more formal way. Anyway, so that interest stuck with me throughout. But at that time, it was my impression that there wasn't any very good and certainly not very respected way to approach this scientifically. Actually, I did this. Mark Konishi, where he's still alive, could tell you the story. When I was getting close to finishing my thesis, like around the time Demacio was visiting, I was seriously considering to do a second PhD in philosophy because of this interest, because of this interest, and because it seemed to me that the science, we didn't have the tools yet to really address it. So I actually asked Mark Konishi, what do you think about this? After I'm done here, I'll do a PhD in philosophy. And Mark said, no way, you need to continue with science. So I went to Demacio instead. I did seriously think about it, because it seemed to me at the time that this was, that if one wanted to really try to understand or do some work related to consciousness, philosophy would be it, not science, because the science you didn't even know what kinds of experiments you need to do.
Interestingly, Christoph also did philosophy as a part of the degree, right?
I think so.
I think it was a double degree between physics and philosophy, probably.
Probably double, triple, for Christoph. Yes, probably multiple.
And you did the philosophy course, not the...
Right. Yeah. No, my major was in chemistry, actually, chemistry and biology. I didn't major in philosophy.
So there has been some kind of a recent discussion about the value of the philosophy or liberal arts in general in
and actually I've been involved with various, and recently we had a recent paper in PNAS on this. It's always a challenge. What does philosophy contribute to science? And historically, of course, they were kind of the same thing.
Right.
But nowadays, you certainly encounter lots of scientists who think philosophy is bad. And of course, there is a lot of bad philosophy, no question. But I think it's possible to do good philosophy and to have philosophy very strongly benefit science, to the point where I would certainly, it depends on the science that you do, of course, but I would certainly say if you're doing cognitive science, cognitive psychology, cognitive neuroscience of any kind, I would say some training in philosophy is essential, both in terms of the methods and approaches, and also in terms of the actual content and knowing something.
Right.
So I've always been extremely positively inclined towards philosophy. When at Caltech, you might know, I mean, the Humanities and Social Sciences division, which kind of stands out from all the other empirical science divisions like chemistry, biology, and physics. And I'm sometimes asked, like, well, what part of humanities and social sciences at Caltech do you think is actually useful? Just like a bunch of people just teaching, English, literature, and history because we have to teach that to the students, or is it actually contributing something? And there's a couple of answers to that. I mean, it has excellent social science, economics, etc. But one answer I have is philosophy. That if you look at Caltech as an integrated kind of institution, which it is given its small size, quite integrated, the contribution of the Humanities and Social Sciences division, one big contribution should be in philosophy of science, history of science, where philosophers could actually interface with other scientists. And I really think that should be developed. I mean, there are islands of success there. We have very good philosophers. Before he left, we had Jim Woodward working on causal and causality. We have the Einstein Papers project, which is great in terms of sort of history of science. But I think any institution that's doing serious science and wants to be integrated in an institution needs to have one cornerstone represented there, which is philosophy, and in particular philosophy of science, I think.
Yeah, I really remember that in the lab meeting, often I saw Jim Woodward sitting in the corner of the room. But he didn't say much.
Well, now I collaborate quite closely with Friedrich Eberhard, who's sort of two philosophers doing lots of causality stuff, are Chris Hitchcock and Friedrich Eberhard. Friedrich Eberhard is a younger faculty, he's tenured, and we've co-authored some papers, but he works on causal discovery. I mean, if you looked at what he published, you would say he should be in computer science or something like that. But anyway, so he's a great colleague to interact with.
Yeah, part of the reason I now I got attracted to Monash University was that there was a strong representation of philosophers who are working on consciousness. At the time, especially Jakob Hovi, but at the time when we were talking, there were several potential people joining there. And right now, in fact, I'm working with Jenny Vint, who works on dreaming as a philosopher, and also I have some joint supervision student, PhD student with Tim Bain. So Monash is quite kind of friendly.
Yeah, no, these are all good people. Yeah. And it's just I mean, aside from, I think one can make strong arguments that it just helps the science. It provides a more integrated program certainly for studying consciousness, cognition, mind, any of these domains. It's just fun. I mean, I just enjoy interacting with philosophers rather than just being down in the empirical science domain.
Yeah.
So
throughout, kind of, I have an impression that you are, value in doing science is partly for fun, right?
Well, ideally, yes, yes, of course. That's the ideal. I mean, a lot of it is also constrained by the practicalities of getting funding, et cetera, et cetera. But yes, ideally you should. I mean, that's the starting point, right? You should start, and I always tell people in my lab this: start by asking yourself, what do you really want to do? What interests you? What do you find fun? And then you go from there. And there's a zillion constraints, but you should certainly. I mean, that's the objective. Yes. Right. You want to be doing something. It's not just fun. I mean, that sounds frivolous, but it's a combination of something you think is fun in the sense that it stimulates you, etc., and is interesting, and that you are convinced is important. I mean, they kind of go together, I guess.
Right. Yeah, the value, also life sort of purpose kind of idea. I would say, And then
do you want to pass? No. Okay. Okay. Well, please. Some kind of YouTube channel.
He's also that you're the director of the movie or stuff, right? Yeah. So I would be interested.
You can tell us if the angle of the.
This I told now is in Ralph's.
Yeah, I don't know if you've told people what we are on this little island off the coast of Venice, Italy,
You
currently.
should bring the camera down a little,
Down?
and you should make it more towards you to center you guys. No, the other way.
You see?
There.
Yeah, that's
So
better.
we just got cinematographic optimization from an expert. Thank you.
People often point cameras too far up.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
cut off people's feet without reason when they take photographs. What are you guys discussing? Consciousness?
Yeah.
Yeah, everything. Life, consciousness.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, I won't interrupt you. Go on.
Thank you. And so then we talked about that up until your life in kind of Iowa, and then so you are from the beginning, then you are interested in consciousness and brain, right? And then but
Yeah.
when I actually approached you from the outside at least, it looked like your main interest was emotion.
Yeah, that was, I think,
Oh.
so, like I said, consciousness, at least at that time,
Oh.
seemed to me
Oh.
too difficult and broad, and also, not exactly what I should put into my CV if I wanted to get tenure, right? That but you could do stuff related to
Yes,
consciousness,
exactly. Yeah,
shortage. So emotion was one of those.
Oh.
So that's one reason, and the other is just totally serendipitous, which is when I was a postdoc with Demacio. I started, I would say, pretty much randomly. When I arrived there,
Oh.
he had this registry. There were all these lesion patients. They
Right.
would come in, and you could start, testing them. So I did that, and I started, with this patient SM who had lesions of the amygdala, and so that naturally led into emotion. And then, of course, I rode that wave, and I did as much as I could, and kept emotion as a centerpiece. And lo and behold, it's not irrelevant to consciousness.
Yeah, it's
So
definitely, yeah.
that started and is still a thread in the lab, although it's certainly not the only thing that we do.
And your first paper with SM was like the first project that you did with after joining Demacio, and then within
Yeah, it
6
was-
months you got the
Yeah,
draft for Nature paper.
Yeah, within like a year I had a Nature paper. That's right. So now I tell everybody in my lab, in the first year of your postdoc, actually Mark Konishi said
Yeah.
this to me when I left.
Yeah.
He said, you should publish a Nature paper in your first year.
Yeah.
Okay, that's why not?
Yeah, you told me that. Yeah.
No,
that
but
was,
honestly, I mean,
yeah.
that's luck.
Yeah.
It's not, obviously you have to do stuff.
Right.
And so basically what I did as soon as I arrived there, I was just crazy busy. I tested a lot of different patients. I was learning human, cognitive neuropsychology, which I had no background in
Right.
at all.
Right. Because you are
so-
dealing with the owl.
I went from owl electrophysiology and doing experiment, getting up at noon
Oh.
or later and doing
Oh.
experiments till late at night and having the life of a Caltech graduate student,
Oh.
to needing to get
Really?
up at like 7:00 in the morning and go to these morning meetings.
Yeah, I didn't know that you were like that night person.
I did all my owl experiments at night. I think-
Because they were night kind of.
No. I think the reason was really simple, which is during the day,
Oh.
they were all like, they had classes and there were like all these seminars going on. There was like all these
I
interruptions.
see.
So if you wanted like a quiet, and people were coming in and out, etc. So if you wanted like quiet time that was completely uninterrupted,
Right.
well, you waited till after dinner and things got quiet and then did an experiment all night long.
Yeah, as you know, when I was postdoc with you, my time was really disrupted and
Yeah.
also like
Yeah.
that, actually working through night
Yeah.
and then, yeah.
I
But
think it's
now I'm completely actually fixed. Really,
Yeah, same here.
yeah.
Yeah. But anyway, when I came to Iowa as a postdoc,
Yeah.
it was a radical change in 7:00 morning meetings, and then I was just super busy and did so as I mentioned, Iowa was and is a really good place to get a lot of work done because
Right.
there was not that much else to do. There was no mountains or beach or rock climbing or anything. It's like cornfields.
distraction.
No. So
I
I just did a ton of stuff. And
Right.
to come back to what we were speaking about, the way, the sort of genesis of this first Nature paper with SM, I tried a whole bunch of things and, there were some observations that seemed really interesting. And then I, just ran with that. So we had this one patient, Boswell, who had herpes simplex encephalitis, which lesioned the amygdala and lots of temporal neocortex and looks almost similar to Kluver-Bucy lesions in monkeys. Very large bilateral lesions. So he's amnesic, agnosic, but he had a disproportionate deficit in recognizing sort of negative emotions around fear and anger from visual stimuli and pictures that I was showing him. And so knowing something about, what people thought the amygdala was involved in, which was processing related to fear, and the fact that this was bilaterally damaged, this seemed like an interesting hypothesis. So I go to Demasio's lesion registry and I say, is there a patient that has selective lesions of the amygdala, unlike this one? And sure enough, there's one, this patient SM. So we brought her in, I tested her, and then everything, a bunch of Nature papers followed.
But that story is actually quite also insightful in especially probably current environment for young scientists, especially grad students and so on, because some of the students, my students, were in a sense pressured. Potentially, maybe it's because Australia's funding system, but they need to get out from the PhD program within 3 years and a half.
Wow, that's really short.
Yeah, so they are quite reluctant to test various things, and then trying to be careful and also observant about the data, and then think about the good things out of that kind of pathway. In a sense, to me, it's much easier to do right now because we can do online experiments and also data analysis without really spending all this time on something that takes really long time.
Well, it depends. It totally depends on the field. I think if you're training a monkey or you're doing some laborious experiment, then you don't have the leisure to try a lot of things, and there's such a huge investment. So it totally depends. But if you have the opportunity, if you have lots of patients available, if you're doing mostly behavioral work or internet-based studies, then indeed, I totally agree. I think there's that certainly beginning graduate students, beginning postdocs, and for that matter, beginning faculty, should have some protected time to play around and just try out things.
Too much pressure on them for the publish kind of publication.
Yeah, I mean that's a well-known trade-off. That's It's in general, the way I try to run the lab is to kind of try to buffer, graduate students and postdocs from all of that, and have them have as much freedom as possible. In
fact, Mark Konishi's method, and so you also to some extent follow that kind of a pathway of making them do whatever.
Mark was definitely sink or swim like that. It was just, I distinctly remember when I started as a graduate student in his lab, so I just arrived, as a first year graduate student. And of course, I sat in his office, and of course I asked him, okay, what would you like me to do? Do you have some ideas, some projects maybe I should start on? And he wouldn't say anything. He just said, you can do whatever you like. I said, well, that's great, but like what? Can you give me some suggestions? And he would just say, no, whatever you want, total freedom. And that's hard. For most people, it's, I think, not a good idea. I think you want some
there was
structure.
some kind of restriction, right? Like something related to the bird species, no? Like you couldn't
to be honest,
octopus. No.
I don't know. I think I'm not sure, to be honest. And I have actually said this to people in my lab, but nobody's ever taken me up on it. I've said, look, if one of you, has like a totally crazy way out idea, if you can persuade me that it has to make some sense, I'm willing to fund it from a discretionary account. So if you want to put a tank up and have an octopus, you have a year before your animal is going to die. You have a year to do something. If you have some idea that's way out and doesn't fit with what the lab is doing, so to speak, but it sounds really good, I'm all for that. But nobody ever has done that. So maybe at some
Hopefully
point
this in a video invites somebody.
I think the honest answer is, which I think everybody knows, is it totally varies depending on the student. So I think some students do very well with that, and they have a lot of creative ideas, and they're really totally self-motivated, and those people you want to just let go, and they're going to do well. And some people will completely fall apart if you force that on them. And they need structure, and you need to work with them and provide them some structure, and then they can do very well. So you have to tailor it to the, these are all individuals with big individual differences. You have to tailor it to the particular personality and style of the student. And I think discovering, they don't know often what works, and you don't know what works. So discovering, what style is best is I think a big challenge always in the first year or two for you as an advisor and for the student. Okay, try some things on your own, you come back a few months later, nothing's happened. Okay, well, let's maybe hope if I'm some structure. And so you play around with that and you try to, figure out what works. Where what works is, it's not, like just sheer productivity. What works is some combination of getting stuff done and being productive, but also being happy and, finding some direction, etc. So it's I mean, I spend a huge amount of time always on exactly this question, how best to advise or guide students and postdocs. It's totally variable.
Yeah, so that kind of thing is actually the thing that I didn't really expect to learn from you, or when I tried to join. I mainly approached you from the point of view of the methodology and also the topic that you are doing, partially probably because of my experience with Christoph. Christoph's labs was, in a sense, quite neutral with respect to these human relationship aspects of the lab. He didn't probably put any structure, but the only thing he was doing for the lab social was like paying for this lab lunch every week. And
I remember those. Yeah. He had an espresso machine too.
Yeah, towards the end of espresso, not the coffee machine. Standard
an espresso machine.
I think you had a very nice.
We have one now. We have one in our. We put a lot of work into getting a nice carpet and pictures of the Sierra Nevada on the walls and everything in our coffee room. And we have a nice espresso machine.
So
anyway,
something like that was quite shocking when I joined your lab, right? Because quite a bit of the lab meeting time was devoted to this kind of discussion, also the lab camping plan and so on.
I mean, now especially since COVID, even more so. I said, since COVID started and imposed lots of psychological challenges to people. I would say, like, I don't know, maybe almost half the lab meetings are not, or half the time on lab meetings are not just, scientific presentations, but discussions about mental well-being. We fill out like questionnaires at the lab meetings, and, how well we're doing. We have lots of activities always, organized. And we have discussions of, how can we optimize our, mental well-being? How can you work most efficiently? Career lab meetings, lots of stuff about, ethics, authorship issues, all of this other stuff that's not the science per se, but of course, these are all necessary, if you will, enabling ingredients that make the science possible, which is something that, I always stress to people. Like, look, you and your mental health and physical health for that matter have to be like number one before anything else, because if that goes, everything else goes, right? Yeah.
It's so kind of true, but it's also at the same time not true for many of the scientists or PIs who are listening to this, probably, right?
Well, I think everybody would agree it's true. They would just say, yes, sure, but this is something that you can figure out at home or with your friends. It's not my job, and like here now, you're kind of at work and you should be doing the science. I think if you discussed it with most people, they would agree. Of course, this is important. If you have a problem with mental well-being, okay, talk to a counselor or something, but that's not the purpose of the lab. So they would partition what the job is sort of for the lab and for the advisor in the lab from the rest. But I think they would still agree that, of course, yes, the rest is really important. It's just not part of what I have expertise in and what we should spend time doing.
Well, maybe what I meant was that the PIs know the importance of this kind of thing, but they don't implement it, or they spend much less effort on thinking about it, right?
Well, it's certainly true that, as far as I know, there's basically zero training for faculty in this. I mean, I certainly I didn't receive any kind of training on how to run a lab. Right?
I see. So you developed all this strategy and kind of a framework?
You can read stuff up. There's lots of stuff, lots of advice on this, and there's people who have other labs, where you can see how they do it. But
it's not really how the Demacio was running the lab or Mark was running the lab.
No, because they didn't run it like that. No. So I definitely just implemented it
gradually within Iowa initially, and then by the time when you came to Caltech, it's kind of
I guess
changed the version.
Yeah, I mean,
upgraded
it
OS
keeps
into
kind of,
something?
changing around, and it arises in good part, not just from me, but from discussions among the lab. So, we have lots of discussions and people weigh in and say, this is a good idea, this, or we should do that. And I think that's definitely one important aspect of how the lab functions, which is that everybody feels really comfortable talking about these things and contributes to the discussion. So I think it makes for a very, it makes for an atmosphere where people, are not just happy, etc., but also for a tightly knit social network. So I think people in the lab feel that all the other people in the lab, myself included, are part of a close, social network. And if they need somebody to ask questions, or on whose shoulder they want to cry or something like that, there's actually a pretty strong social support structure right there in the lab. And again, as I mentioned, especially when COVID happened, I think this became really, really critical, because a lot of people were isolated in various ways, couldn't go back to China, etc. And so I think that became especially important to have the lab be, like a big family of some kind.
Yeah. Some of the sort of team effort or team kind of performance book, especially the one that I recently read, written by the Google's manager. Emphasize safety, sense of safety.
Right.
Is quite important for the good functioning of the team, right?
Yeah.
I certainly, was in a sense, shocked in many ways, but in good ways when I joined your lab, this lab camping trip, and also.
We just did it again. So, we took a break for 2 years because of COVID, but we just went to Catalina Island again, like a month ago or so, and went camping. Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
So, I was planning to have something like that when I have a lab.
But you told me you go down to this peninsula.
Yeah, Wilson's Prom.
Yeah,
we did that once, but it's like 3.5 hour trip to go there. So current lab members also contain several proportion of people who just don't like to go outside too far. So there's a compromise. We have picnic and also sometimes lab dinner and so on. Unlike Caltech, actually, Australia in general doesn't provide some kind of discretionary fund to.
Caltech is really exceptional in that way, and we're very fortunate to have that you can basically launder each money, as it were, into this discretionary account, and then spend it, really quite flexibly.
Is that okay to keep, or should we edit?
There's no privacy in the whatever.
That's fine.
Yeah, I'm happy with everything being public.
Yeah, that's fine. All right, I wouldn't then edit out.
It's not laundered. So appropriately, it's actually, if you think, I always tell people this, for the same amount of money, if you think how much it costs to pay for a graduate student or a postdoc, that budget line item, if you just applied that to social activities, lab dinners and stuff, the effect is huge.
Yeah,
I mean, it would go.
I totally agree with that. Yeah.
It's just hard to convince taxpayers, I guess, that sitting around over a beer is something that should be funded.
But it's not really probably taxpayer, right? That is difficult to convince. No. But it's more to do with the administrative people
so
in the standard university.
Yeah, but I mean, specifically how it works is that, so I have an endowed chair, so I have my salary in any case.
Right.
But then it's, I guess, required often on grants that you put a certain amount of effort in, and then that has to be tracked. And so that money has to go towards your salary. But so since I'm already getting the salary, it goes into the discretionary account. But you could, so I guess one way you could say is, well, no, so the NIH money is actually going towards my salary, and my endowed chair money that should be coming to me that's the money that's going to the discretionary account. I guess you could see it either way. So it's not like actual, coins are being passed around that anybody could trace. So
so then I should be trying to aim at that endowed chair position in the future.
Well, but again, it depends on whether an institution has this kind of mechanism. Most do not. And they all have endowed chairs and federal grants, but somehow it's not obvious to see.
In Australia, it's very rare, and I wouldn't probably qualify for that at the moment. But there's one person who got that thing within my building, and he was a really special kind of person. So I think the US is more likely
It depends. I mean, all of these things are getting harder and harder because everybody is there's all this audit, layers of auditing and regulations, and so everything is always being checked and probed, and has to be proper. And there's a huge amount of more and more, time and effort spent on this, which is not good. I mean, I spend a lot of my time just on regulatory stuff. I mean, I can see that it has a purpose, and I can also see how it sort of takes on a life of its own, because once it's there, you can keep. And this happens in the IRB, the Institutional Review Board that reviews human subjects research, which I chair at Caltech, and it's exactly how it goes. So we keep adding, things. People sit around and say, well, but what about this and this and this, and it's a legitimate problem. And so then some regulatory stuff has to be added to check on that, and then there's something else that has to be plugged. But the effect is that you keep it's like it grows without bound. So you keep growing all these regulations and checks, and after a while it becomes so onerous. It's hard to know how to break that.
Unless you reward people who can reduce these red tapes, it keeps on growing, right?
It keeps on growing. It's a natural way to go, and it's so it's hard to break. I mean, I try to. I just say, look, can we just ignore this? I mean, look at it. Just step back from this. This doesn't make any sense. We don't need it. But people will say, but it says, here on line 45, blah blah blah. I mean, Japan is like this, right?
Yeah, exactly.
You're like super strict, and you have all these things. And if you just say, look, but we don't really need it. Just think about it. Right. Can we just ignore it?
Right.
Then people are really quiet, and of course the mechanism in America that people are really quiet and say, no, we have to do it, is some fear of some kind of a lawsuit. Yes, somebody's going to sue you, right?
Exactly.
And so then it just gets stuck. It's very hard to know. And if you try to be bold and brave and you say, okay, look, I'm just going to violate it, well, then you could have a lawsuit. So it's hard to know how to break it. But it's definitely, I mean, I see it over the years. It keeps growing and growing and growing. And all of the regulatory layers that go along with doing science keep getting more onerous, to the point where now, I'm spending a lot of time just on regulatory compliance issues that don't have anything to do with actually doing the science. And I don't know that I mean, I try to ignore some of them, and I tell people, okay, so sue me. I also speed on the freeway, too bad. And so far, nothing bad has happened, but I'm not sure what the solution is. Yeah.
So one of the reasons why I was very interested in coming to Australia is exactly Australia solved the problem around the time like 1989 or so. Yeah. There was a very legendary politician, Howard. And around the same time, Japan and Australia was almost having similar kind of problem, like too much regulation and so too much bureaucracy and so on. But Howard actually invented a system and built in this bureaucracy for the rewarding the bureaucrats to reduce the number of the regulations, and that's still probably functioning. And so the number of the things that we need to do for IRB and review is extremely fast. For example, in Monash, if you submit the ethics approval, typically within 2 to 3 weeks, it's approved, and the amendment is within one day or so. Yeah, so it's very fast and very efficient. So there are some, currently big difficulty in other things, but in general, I think that's the
great.
only way.
Yes. If some mechanism like that can be set, it probably requires what you said, which is some total top-down commitment to make this work.
Right.
So good luck having that happen. In America, but yes.
You can't do that as an IRB chair.
Well, no, I'm not like the president. Or what you need is an enlightened dictator to run the country and just set things straight.
But life, cleaning up things to simplify things are very important.
Absolutely. Right? And I mean, running a lab, especially, I mean, you probably have the same thing. You're once you get tenure, you go along, you have lots of grants. Trying to find a focus and kind of pruning things down is hard, but really important, because otherwise you get there's no shortage of interesting new questions. And so if somebody takes me up on this and wants to have an octopus in the lab, Okay, and then if somebody wants to have a cuttlefish, maybe somebody wants to study dolphins, I mean, then so, and that's what's happened in the lab. I mean, we're not studying all of those things, but we're looking at, social cognition and autism and emotion, but we're also looking at abstraction and population coding in neurons that have nothing, those studies have nothing to do with emotion or social cognition. And so trying to find, some cohesion amongst the projects it's always going on. I mean, it's a very organic kind of process.
Do you have any strategy to say no or to cut things to simplify?
Not in terms of a simple, like something I could write down. No. It's very organic. I mean, I guess it's kind of a trade-off, basically. If something is not super interesting, but it's like really closely related to core stuff going on in the lab, it's likely to be included. If something is really far out there, it has to be really, really interesting to make it. But the problem is there's lots of really, really interesting stuff outside.
Right.
But then, the other thing that I spend quite a bit of time doing, actually, like for instance, when I give new talks or something like that, it's sort of taking a survey of, okay, what's all the stuff going on, right? What are all the what's the full portfolio? And there's like a lot of different things. Can I assemble pieces from this that are related? That would be like a story, like what I could present in a talk. And the answer is yes. You can draw from lots of things together. Like not 100% of this project actually fits, but 20% does. And so then that way you can kind of shape the ongoing projects and try to bring them, together to some extent. And then the other thing that happens in the lab, it's, I think, very common in my lab, is that people have, groups or teams where they collaborate. So it's not just a single person doing something, but they interface with, multiple little sub-networks of people in the lab. And that ends up being very powerful because sometimes you can have people with really different backgrounds doing very different things that are somehow collaborating, or, this person has some computational technique that can be co-opted for a completely different question, something like that. That happens a lot. But to steer that, in that direction and make it work, it does mean I have to, know what's going on in the lab, which is a big task. So knowing what everybody's doing, especially when it gets down to the weeds and the nitty gritty, is a lot of work to just keep track of, all these different threads.
Yeah.
So it's like all these different threads are going, and I'm weaving a loom of some beauty as we go along. There's the analogy.
I see. So you don't have a explicit, I do remember that, you don't put too much top-down control or make sort of the explicit sort of statement of the general direction the lab is heading. Right?
I mean, I presented at lab meetings. Every once in a while, I try to provide some kind of synthesis. Sometimes it's just a review of, this year we had these papers.
So like once a year. End of the year, or
maybe more often than that, like once every 6 months. And sometimes I just distill some general principles and say these are some main principles, or I try and come up with a list or a Venn diagram or something.
Right.
And like I said, I do it in my own mind quite often. Certainly when I'm, preparing a talk for something, I try to pick some theme, and then I say, okay, well, what are all the projects currently going on? Which ones have something to say about this, and how can you form a story there? But it's an interesting question, and I think again, every lab is and should be different. There's no single way of doing science. I think that's one reason why science has been so successful in our discovery about how nature works. Is there is no single recipe. It's you need a ton of different approaches.
Yeah, but as you said that there's no kind of education or kind of good course or principle for the young PI to learn this kind of thing. So as a result, I literally learned how to manage a lab in the Christoph's ways and also your way.
Right.
And then kind of took the better part of it and then to implement it.
But I mean, the reason that there is no such thing is pretty simple, which is nobody knows how to do it. There is no single way to do it. I mean, I could start a course on advice to junior faculty. And some of them would like it, and some of them would say this is completely ill-conceived, and that's not the way I would do it. So you could have, but no, I mean, I think it would be beneficial. And there are things like this, but it should be more formally instituted, that you would have, like a seminar where some set of, senior faculty would basically do what we're doing now, right, on the YouTube thing here, and kind of, ramble on and give some advice that more junior people could learn from. Not in terms of like a formal course, let alone like a set of regulations or anything like that. But just to put the information out there. Yeah.
Some kind of social neuroscience or social cognitive science, organizational psychology kind of research would be probably useful, right? And then Google does this kind of internal research on themselves and then implement and like, what you said about, group-based kind of projects. That seems to be recognized these days as a very efficient way to be creative and productive and also also generating some cohesiveness.
And there's no shortage of information and metrics also about careers and how happy postdocs are and so forth. And whenever journals like Nature often have these kinds of pieces on career advice and so forth. And we disseminate those in the lab. And so there is information out there, more and more. But it would be good to collect it in something like a seminar for junior faculty or something like that. There's pieces. The thing is, it's very multifaceted. So, for instance, we have like an ethics, course that's required for all the students at Caltech. We have like, Title IX and sexual harassment training that's required for faculty. So you have like bits and pieces, but there's not like an integrated kind of package, especially for the more informal parts of how to run a lab.
Okay. Maybe we talked quite a bit, but I also wanted to ask you about sort of so far we talked kind of past and so current, what you're doing, or maybe not really touching upon current, your most enthusiastic research and future kind of plan. If we can touch a little bit about that, like your self-scanning project, that would be interesting to hear. But if it's secret, that's fine.
No, there's nothing secret. There's a bunch of things going on. We have been doing more behavioral studies. In part because it's so easy to get large-scale behavioral data now, with the internet, for example.
Right.
So we're getting lots of, like Chujun's paper in Nature Communications, and ones based on that. We're looking at like similarity structures, dimensional spaces that would characterize various psychological dimensions, like trait inferences of faces, etc. So there's a lot of behavioral studies we're doing, and then indeed there's one specific. So I can just say a few words about that. One specific neuroimaging experiment that has myself as one subject, in addition to Mike Tishka, who's associate director of the Imaging Center and a graduate student. And so the question, I started, as we mentioned, with this rare subject, my first Nature paper as a postdoc, looking at the amygdala. And so the amygdala and its role in emotion and so forth has always been a sort of core thread in the lab. If you look at fMRI studies on the amygdala, and there's no shortage of them, they're all really bad in general. And the reasons are simple. The sample sizes, this applies to lots of fMRI. Sample sizes are too small, but in particular, signal to noise in the amygdala is really problematic in fMRI, as you know. The signal dropout, geometric distortion, draining veins, all kinds of issues. So we wanted to do things of the sort that people like Jack Gallant at Berkeley are doing, where you can present a really rich stimulus, like a movie that has all kinds of different auditory and visual features in it, and you just have people watch a ton of this, and then you build an encoding model, basically a big regression model that says, I take all of these different features, when there's a face, something loud, something funny, all these different features in the stimulus, and I ask how well can I predict activation in a voxel or a nucleus of the amygdala in the brain. So that's the project we're doing. We're doing it in just these three subjects, and so we're I don't know, it's like 50 hours of scanning or something that I'm enduring, and we have the scanning parameters emphasize signal in the amygdala, unlike most scanning. Most studies are whole brain field of view, and they mostly emphasize cortex. Here it's not. It's a slab that has a very short TR and really focuses on the amygdala. So the idea is to get the best signal we can with, very short TR for, tons of hours of scanning on a rich stimulus. We're using like Forrest Gump and some of these other stimuli that people have used for this.
From the beginning to the end, unlike 5 minutes short.
It's not the whole thing at once, but it's in pretty big segments. Yeah, and actually, for Forrest Gump, since I'm bilingual, I'm watching it in English and in German.
Oh, really?
Yeah, this guy Michael Henke, who made it, has both versions available.
That's interesting.
Yeah, Mike Tischka also is watching that, and he can kind of understand German a little bit, but not too well. And then the third subject, Yue, who's a Chinese graduate student in the lab, will not be able to understand the German at all. But of course, the low-level features, auditory features will be the same. So
the Chinese students are also watching it twice in German and also not in Chinese.
No, I don't. Well, maybe it's dubbed in Chinese. No.
I mean, it's unfair, right? You should also watch it in Chinese.
Yes, we could do all permutations, but mind you, it's a little boring watching Forrest Gump. It's kind of slow.
Right.
But actually, so I just finished this. We did, retinotopic mapping and all this other stuff. Super tedious and gives you a headache. And then Forrest Gump, it's okay. It's kind of boring. And then Grand Budapest Hotel, which has also been used for fMRI studies, a little more interesting. But now we're just using our own videos, which is like Planet Earth. It's just these nature things, BBC kind of nature things or something, or David Attenborough narrating these nature things. And at least for me, if you ask me, well, what do you find, what elicits like the strongest emotions, what's the most interesting? The Planet Earth nature videos by far. I mean, I get super interested watching the animals and, because it's real. It's like real things going on. Whereas if I see Tom Hanks, at a young age acting in Forrest Gump, it's like, it's really not that interesting, right?
I see.
And this is interesting to
but
me.
Do you get that kind of subjective experience online or?
Yeah.
Okay, so you are recording.
Oh no. So we're getting EKG and eye tracking.
So you infer the physiological response.
It's just passive viewing of, with eye tracking, etc. But it's just passive viewing of the videos.
But your subjective impression.
Right. I know my subjective impression, and it's interesting. So the videos have zero people of this planet Earth. It's just beautiful, nature and a lot of animals and stuff. And it's way more engaging. I mean, I'm super emotionally engaged, and it's interesting because, as you probably know, I had this, you were on the paper with Florian Moorman, Nature Neuroscience, which showed single neuron recordings in the human amygdala. They respond to animals, right? So
only on the right amygdala.
That it was right lateralized, and there's lots of other caveats, but still, it's a reasonable hypothesis, not only from that study, but also on general ecological grounds. That yes, maybe the amygdala will respond to features, biological motion, whatever, of actual natural stimuli like animals. So I'm hopeful we can extract something out of this and actually, have some new insight into what stimulus features is it that are most potent at driving bold signal in the amygdala, which is what this would basically, it's a slab. So it's amygdala and actually all of ventral temporal cortex. So we get that as well.
I see. I see. That's.
But anyway, it's a fun study. We're sort of halfway through it. And of course, this, taking a vacation in Venice to be here in this course and chat with you has interfered with me being a subject for the scanning, because otherwise twice a week I have to hop in the scanner. I'm taking a break.
I see. So also you gave a talk in this course, pretty much on maybe like 2/3 of your talk was about animal consciousness.
Yeah, right? I looked at the lineup, which wasn't very clearly explained, but it seemed like there was lots of stuff on consciousness, and neurology of consciousness was the session I was in, but nothing really surveying animal consciousness. And a lot of it seemed to be all, human studies mostly.
Right.
And so it just seemed like a topic, and it's a topic of, personal interest that would be worth reading up on and preparing a lecture on. So, I did that. And yeah, I think it is, I think, a super important topic, both for ethical reasons, but also for scientific and philosophical reasons. I think that if you're going to do serious research on consciousness, the concept of consciousness that you work with should aim to be minimally self-centered and minimally anthropocentric, and you should try to have some concept of consciousness of what it would be like, if you were an octopus or a whale or, some other animal. Obviously, that's hard to do, but at least heading in that direction, I think is really
I don't know whether I talked about your about my recent research when I visited Caltech maybe a couple of years ago, like 5 or 6 years ago, I don't know. But I worked with Bruno van Swinderen, who works on Drosophila fly, and he's using sleep and also anesthesia model of the Drosophila, recording the LFP across entire brain, and then what we found, in a series of experiment or papers published, one is that under the anesthesia, sensory evoked potential becomes bigger in the periphery, which is similar to what humans, V1 or in the primary auditory cortex seems to respond as well. And also, the global communication across areas also gets diminished under the anesthesia. And also, when we computed the integrated information, which was the talk today in the version 3, that today was version 4, right?
They keep updating. I'm sure we'll have version 12 or something
soon. Anyway, the 3 version, which we constructed the structure estimate. It also collapsed with the anesthesia.
So I think these are exactly the kinds of experiments one should try to do.
Right.
Especially now, we have the Drosophila connectome. We have, like, in the Fliegen vectors paper, lots of recordings from everything. So it seems like a model system where you have, in principle, the dependent measures available to compute some surrogate of phi or something like this. And you could actually start, testing some of these things. Yes.
And the thing that I kind of noticed with other people's attitude is that the less you know about that model animals, then you tend to dismiss the consciousness of that animal really easily, right? Like nobody, on the street, if I ask them how many neurons do you think that fly has in the brain, they may say just like 10 or 100.
They would know. Well, they probably wouldn't know how many neurons a human brain has either. But, right.
But the fact is, like, it's less than bees or something like that. But like 0.1 million neurons exist in this tiny fly. And the complexity of that thing is just humongous, right?
It is.
So knowing these kind of numbers and also imagining what the actual processing can be starts to give you some idea of what it's like to be pro.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, I guess we'll hear more about it here in about 5 minutes since the talk is going to start. But certainly when when Julia presents this, I mean, you get the impression that phi for brains of any complexity, let alone a human brain, is astronomically large.
More than astronomical.
Right.
2 to the n.
It's, I mean, and people ask this question there, is there some kind of a threshold? Like where would you put the threshold? Why do you say all this, this table and everything else here is dust or something? Is there some threshold below which there's no, and of course you could, but it would be arbitrary to apply some kind of number and say, everything above this is conscious and below is not. But it certainly seems like that in your own case. It's not that when I go into a deep sleep or a coma, I feel like less conscious. No, I go from conscious to unconscious. There's like a switch, and then it's like a rheostat above that. So certainly when you're awake, the contents of your consciousness can be richer or less. But it seems like there's a threshold below which there's just no consciousness, period. So that seems like something that needs to be accounted for.
That's one issue you have with IIT?
You have lots of issues with IIT.
I mean, that's going to be
it's very
next time.
But let me close on this, just so people don't come away with the wrong impression. I do think IIT, it's certainly the most ambitious theory and one that I would deeply respect, because the starting point, the axioms that Giulio starts with, this is really, it takes consciousness seriously, like in that quote from Chalmers. What you end up with, you may disagree with, and it's it's a difficult problem. But at least everybody else, all the other theories, you can see these are not really theories of consciousness, right?
Exactly.
So,
it's more to do with the behavior, or more to do with what we can
They're
measure.
addressing more the easy, which is not to say they're irrelevant. I mean, I think we need everything, and maybe eventually they'll help us understand the hard problem. But they're not addressing it head on, whereas IIT is actually taking the hard problem and trying to address it head on, which is I think one needs to respect. I mean, it's very bold in that respect.
Okay. Yeah, I wanted to hear more, but thanks a lot
Yeah,
for
no.
engaging conversation, and I learned again now.
I hope you guys enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Now and I
It
have to go
was-
back to the course here, unconsciousness, to learn more about IIT.
Yeah, I hope that's also inspirational to people. All right.
Thanks
See you.
now.
Bye bye.